Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open. Back in 2013, I went trick-or-treating with my cousin and my little brother. I was 15 at the time, old enough to feel like I should not be scared of much anymore, but still young enough to get excited about Halloween. I had probably told myself I was mostly going out to keep an eye on my little brother and cousin, but the truth was that I still enjoyed it. Halloween had always had a different feeling from every other night of the year. The streets were full of kids. Porch lights were on. People were dressed in costumes. You could hear people laughing from one house to the next. Everywhere you looked, there were masks, candy bags, plastic buckets, fake blood, capes, superhero costumes, witches, skeletons, and little kids running around too fast for their parents to keep up with. It was one of those Halloween nights where the whole neighborhood seemed alive. There were hundreds of people out, not just a few families walking from house to house. The streets were packed. You could hear kids shouting in the distance. You could hear doors opening and closing. You could smell leaves, cold air, candy, and whatever people had cooking inside their homes. At one point, my cousin, my little brother, and I came to a T in the road. It was a normal intersection, but I still remember it clearly because of what happened afterward. Going left would take you out of the neighborhood. Going right would take you deeper into it. We went right. At first, nothing felt strange. We kept walking with our candy bags, probably talking about which houses gave out the best candy and which ones we still wanted to try. We had been in the middle of all those other kids only minutes before. The neighborhood was busy. Houses had porch lights on. People were answering doors. There was noise everywhere. Then, little by little, things started changing. As we walked deeper into the neighborhood, there were fewer people around. At first, I did not think much of it. Maybe everyone had gone down another street. Maybe we had walked into a section of the neighborhood where people were starting to turn off their lights for the night. Maybe kids had already finished this area and moved on. Those were normal explanations. But the farther we went, the emptier it became. We went up to one house. No one answered. That was not unusual by itself. On Halloween, some people leave their lights on, but do not answer the door right away. Maybe they are in the back of the house. Maybe they are helping a kid with a costume. Maybe they are just not participating. We went to another house. No answer. Then another. Still nothing. By the time we reached the fifth house with no answer, something started to feel wrong. It was not just that the doors stayed closed. It was the fact that the neighborhood had become completely vacant. A few minutes earlier, the streets had been full of kids. There had been people everywhere. Now there was nobody. No families walking between houses. No parents waiting at the curb. No groups of teenagers laughing too loudly. No younger kids running from porch to porch. No cars pulling up. No doors opening. No voices. Nothing. It was like we had crossed some invisible line at that T in the road and stepped into a different version of the neighborhood. I remember stopping and looking around. The houses were still there. The porch lights were still on at some of them. There were decorations in yards, fake cobwebs, plastic skeletons, maybe carved pumpkins on steps. Everything looked like Halloween, but the people were gone. That was what made it creepy. The decorations suddenly did not look fun anymore. They looked abandoned. A fake skeleton in a yard was just a fake skeleton, but when no one else was around, it seemed like it could be something else. A dark window looked darker. A front porch looked farther away. A house with no lights in it looked empty in a way that made you wonder whether anyone had ever been inside. My cousin and little brother were still with me, and I tried not to let them see that I was getting nervous. I was the oldest one there. I did not want to say, "Something is wrong." I did not want to scare my little brother, so I kept walking, but the feeling was already starting to settle in. The neighborhood was too quiet, not normal quiet, not the kind of quiet you get after trick-or-treating starts winding down. It felt empty in a way that made the air itself seem different. The wind was blowing harder by then. I remember hearing it move through the trees. The branches bent and shook above us. Leaves scraped along the road. Decorations rustled against porch railings. The wind made the neighborhood sound hollow, like there was nothing inside the houses except darkness and old furniture. Then a flock of birds passed overhead. I remember looking up and seeing their shapes moving against the night sky. They were dark birds, and I could have sworn they were crows. Maybe they were not. Maybe they were some other kind of bird that only looked dark in the night. But at the time, they looked like crows. There was something about the way they passed over us that made the whole moment feel even stranger. The wind was howling. The trees were moving. The birds crossed the sky. And then everything stopped. Not slowly. Not like the wind died down over a few seconds. It was instant. The trees froze. The leaves stopped moving. The wind disappeared. The birds were gone from sight. The sounds of the neighborhood vanished. Everything went silent. I do not mean quiet. I mean silent. There is a difference. Normal quiet still has something in it. You can hear distant traffic, insects, a dog barking, someone talking far away, a television through a window, leaves shifting, anything. This was nothing. Pure silence. It felt like someone had shut off the world. I stood there, holding my candy bag, not knowing what to say. My cousin and little brother were quiet too. I remember the strange pressure in my ears, like the silence had weight. The trees were still. That was one of the details that scared me the most. The wind had been strong enough to move branches and blow leaves across the street. Then suddenly, every branch seemed frozen in place. The trees looked like they had been turned into a picture. I remember staring at them, waiting for the wind to come back. It did not. For a few seconds, none of us moved. Then I turned around, and I saw someone standing in the middle of the street. At least, I thought it was someone. It was a shadowy figure shaped like a person. I could not make out clothes. I could not see a face. I could not see hands or hair or anything that would let me say whether it was a man, a woman, or somebody wearing a costume. It was just human-shaped, dark, standing in the middle of the road, but it did not look solid. That was what made it so disturbing. It flickered, not like a person moving in and out of a streetlight, not like a shadow cast by a car. It flickered like a flame. The shape seemed to tremble and shift, as though it could not decide whether it was there or not. 1 second it looked taller, then thinner, then darker. It stayed in the same spot, but the edges of it kept wavering. I remember staring at it because I could not understand what I was looking at. At first, I thought it might be another kid in a costume. Halloween makes you question what is real and what is not. Someone standing in the middle of the street in a dark costume would not normally be impossible. But there was no movement around it. No one walking nearby. No parents calling for someone. No laughter. No other trick-or-treaters. And the figure did not act like a person. It did not wave. It did not turn around. It did not walk toward us. It just stood there, flickering in the middle of a completely silent street. Then we heard the shriek. It sounded like something straight out of a horror movie. It was high, harsh, and sudden. Not a normal scream, not somebody joking, not a kid trying to scare us. It came from somewhere around us, but I could not tell exactly where. The sound cut through the silence so sharply that I felt it in my chest. My little brother started crying, my cousin froze, and then, all at once, everything went back to normal. The trees started moving again. The wind came back. The leaves rushed across the road. The sounds of the neighborhood returned. And suddenly, kids were everywhere again. It was like someone had pressed play. Groups of children came running down the street. Parents appeared on sidewalks. Voices filled the air. Doors opened. Candy bags rustled. Someone laughed nearby. I could hear all the normal sounds of Halloween again. The neighborhood was alive. The figure was gone. There was nothing in the middle of the street. No person, no costume, no shadow. Nothing. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the silence had been in my head. Maybe I had gotten scared by the empty street and turned a shadow into something human-shaped. Maybe the shriek had been a decoration, a car alarm, a distant sound, or someone playing a prank. Maybe everything had happened too fast for my brain to understand it properly. But then I looked at my cousin. She was frozen in fear. She looked like she had seen something too. And my little brother was crying hard, not just startled, but fully terrified. He was bawling his eyes out. That was when I knew I was not the only one who felt something was wrong. I do not know if they saw the exact same thing I saw. I do not know whether they saw the shadowy figure, heard the shriek, or only felt the silence and the sudden change in the neighborhood. But they were scared, really scared. And that was enough for me. We were done after that. No more trick-or-treating, no more knocking on doors, no more walking deeper into the neighborhood. I did not care about candy anymore. My little brother did not care about candy. My cousin did not care either. We wanted to leave. I remember moving quickly after that, probably trying to act calm, even though I was scared myself. I was 15, and I felt like I was supposed to be the one who kept everyone together. But inside, I was shaken. I kept looking over my shoulder. I kept watching the middle of the street. I kept expecting that dark figure to be standing there again. It never was. The rest of the neighborhood looked normal. Kids continued walking around in costumes. Parents called their children back toward the sidewalk. Porch lights glowed. Decorations moved in the wind. Everything looked like it had before. But it did not feel the same. Once you see something that does not fit, it becomes hard to return to normal. Every shadow looked deeper. Every dark yard seemed too quiet. Every flickering porch light made me think about that figure. We eventually made it back. I do not remember every detail of the walk home. I remember that we were quiet. I remember my little brother crying for a while. I remember not wanting to talk about what happened because I did not know how to explain it. What could I even say? That the entire neighborhood disappeared? That the wind stopped? That the trees froze? That I saw a shadowy person flickering in the street? That a scream came from nowhere? It sounded ridiculous, even to me. But it happened. At least, something happened. I know the neighborhood was full of kids shortly before we reached that T in the road. I know we took the right turn. I know the houses stopped answering. I know the street went empty. I know there was wind. I know birds flew overhead. Then I know everything stopped. That part is the hardest thing to explain. A neighborhood does not just become empty in a few minutes. A strong wind does not stop so completely that every tree freezes in place. The sounds of nature do not disappear all at once. And then, a few moments later, Everything does not suddenly return exactly as it was before. Maybe there was a logical reason. Maybe the kids had all moved to another part of the neighborhood at the same time. Maybe there was some event farther up the street that drew everyone away. Maybe we had walked into a quieter section without realizing it. Maybe the wind had dropped suddenly. Weather can change quickly. Maybe the birds had passed over during a quiet moment, and my memory made it seem more dramatic because I was already afraid. Maybe the figure was a decoration, a person in a costume or a shadow from a moving light. Maybe the shriek came from a Halloween decoration that activated at the exact wrong time. All of that is possible, but none of it fully explains the way it felt. The silence was too complete. The figure looked too wrong. The return to normal happened too suddenly, and my cousin and little brother were scared too. I have told people this story before, and most of them do not believe me. I understand why. It sounds like something made up for a horror movie. A busy Halloween neighborhood suddenly becoming empty. A flock of crows, the wind stopping. A shadow figure flickering like a flame. A scream, then everything returning to normal. It sounds too perfect. That is one of the reasons it has stayed with me for so long. It feels unreal even though I remember it clearly. I can still picture the street. I can still picture the trees frozen in place. I can still see that shape in the road. And I can still remember the sound of the shriek. It has been more than a decade, but I remember it as if it happened yesterday. I remember the cold feeling in my chest. I remember the way my cousin looked when I turned toward her. I remember my little brother crying. I remember realizing that whatever had just happened, none of us wanted to stay there another second. Maybe we misunderstood something ordinary. Maybe Halloween, darkness, wind, and fear turned a strange moment into a memory that grew bigger over time. Maybe there was an explanation that we never found. But I have never forgotten that night. I have never forgotten the tea in the road. Left would have taken us out of the neighborhood. Right took us deeper into it. We went right, and for a few moments, it felt like we walked into a place where the whole world stopped moving. When I was younger, I shared a room with my mom. It was not unusual to me at the time. That was just how our home was set up, and I had gotten used to it. We each had our own bed on opposite sides of the room. My bed was right next to the bedroom door, close enough that I could hear every little sound from the hallway. My mom's bed was across the room, near the other wall. Because of where our beds were placed, she had to walk directly past me if she wanted to leave the room. There was no other way out. If she got up in the night to use the bathroom, get water, check something in another room, or do anything at all outside the bedroom, she had to pass right beside my bed. I would usually hear her. The floor had its own small sounds, and her bed was creaky enough that you could hear when she got up or sat down. That is why I remember this night so clearly. I was awake in bed with my laptop. It was the middle of the night, although I do not remember the exact time. I only remember that it was late enough for the whole house to be quiet. The lights were off except for the pale glow from my laptop screen. My mom was already asleep across the room. I was not tired yet. I had probably been watching videos, scrolling through something, playing a game, or doing whatever I normally did when I should have been sleeping. The laptop screen made the room look strange in the dark. It cast just enough light for me to see the outlines of furniture and part of the floor, but not enough to make the room feel fully lit. I could see my mom's bed across the room. I could see the shape of her blanket. I could hear her breathing. Everything felt normal. It was one of those quiet late-night moments where the rest of the world seemed shut down. There were no voices from other rooms, no television, no cars passing outside, no one moving through the house. Just the soft hum of my laptop and the occasional tiny sound from the building settling. I was looking at my screen when I noticed movement. At first, I thought my mom had just shifted in her sleep. That happened sometimes. People roll over. They sit up for a second. They adjust their blanket. They wake up halfway, look around, then lie back down. There was nothing unusual about someone moving in bed, but then she sat straight up, not slowly, not in a sleepy way. She just sat up suddenly. I remember looking over because the movement caught my attention. The blanket had shifted around her, and she was upright in bed for a second. Then she got up, and she ran. She did not walk. She did not stumble toward the door like someone half asleep going to the bathroom. She full sprinted out of the room. It happened so fast that my brain did not understand what I was seeing. She stood up from her bed and moved across the room at a speed I had never seen from her before. My mom was not a petite woman, and I had honestly never seen her run like that in my life. Not casually, not even when she was in a hurry, but that night she moved like something had scared her badly enough that she needed to get out of the room immediately. She ran past my bed. She went through the doorway. Then she was gone. For a second, I just sat there. I did not move right away because I was too confused. I kept looking at the empty spot where her bed was. The blanket had been thrown down to the floor. It was not neatly pushed aside. It looked like she had moved quickly and left it behind. Her bed was empty. The room felt completely wrong without her in it. I remember staring at the open doorway, waiting for her to come back. Maybe she had heard something downstairs. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she needed to use the bathroom urgently. Maybe something had scared her awake. Maybe she had received a phone call or remembered something important. I did not know. But what confused me was how fast she moved. She did not say anything. She did not call my name. She did not turn on a light. She did not even look at me as she passed. She just ran. I got out of bed and followed her. I expected to find her in the hallway. I expected to hear her footsteps. I expected to see her standing in the bathroom, kitchen, living room, or somewhere nearby. But she was not there. The hallway was empty. I called for her. No answer. At first, I assumed she had gone to the bathroom. That would have been the most reasonable explanation. Maybe she was sick and did not have time to say anything. Maybe she had run because she felt nauseous or needed something quickly. I went to check. The bathroom was empty. No light, no sound, no movement. I checked another room. Nothing, then another. Still nothing. The house was quiet. That was when I started feeling nervous. She had not been gone long. There was no way she could have gotten very far. I had seen her run out of the bedroom only seconds before. The house was not huge, and I knew where every room was. I knew how long it took to walk from one end to the other. She should have been somewhere. But I could not find her. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. I checked the living room. Nothing. I checked the hallway again. Nothing. I looked in every room that made sense. Everywhere was dark, and still. The more I searched, the stranger it felt. I remember thinking that maybe she had gone outside. That idea did not make much sense, but I was running out of explanations. If she had not gone into another room, maybe she had gone through one of the doors. Maybe she had heard something outside. Maybe she had seen something through a window. Maybe there was some emergency I did not know about. So I looked outside. I checked through the windows and doors as best as I could. There was nothing. No car, no person, no sign of her walking away, no porch light switching on, no movement in the yard, just darkness. The kind of darkness that makes ordinary spaces feel unfamiliar. I remember standing there, trying to listen. Maybe I would hear her footsteps outside. Maybe I would hear a door open. Maybe I would hear her call out. But there was nothing. No sound at all. At that point, I was scared. Not fully panicking yet, but close. I had seen her leave the bedroom. I was sure of it. I had seen her sit up. I had seen her get up. I had seen her run past my bed and through the door. I had not been asleep. I had been wide awake on my laptop. I was not dreaming. At least, I did not think I was. The laptop was still on in my room. I could remember exactly what I had been watching before I saw her move. I had been awake enough to notice every detail. So where was she? I kept searching. I went through the rooms again. I checked behind doors. I checked the bathroom again. I checked the kitchen again. I looked outside again. Nothing. My mind started going through possibilities that made less and less sense. Maybe I had somehow missed her. Maybe she had passed behind me while I was searching. Maybe she had gone into a room right after I checked it. Maybe she had moved quietly enough that I did not hear her. But I knew the layout of the house. To get back into the bedroom, she would have had to pass by me or walk down the hallway. She would have had to make enough sound for me to notice. And her bed made a specific creak whenever someone got onto it or sat down. I had heard her get up. I had not heard her come back. Still, I did not know what else to do. After searching the rest of the house, I finally went back to the bedroom. I do not know why I went back in there at that exact moment. Maybe I just needed to check one more time. Maybe some part of me hoped she had returned and I had somehow missed it. Maybe I was scared enough that I wanted to be back in the one room that felt familiar. I opened the door, and she was there. My mom was back in bed. She was under the blanket. She was completely asleep. For a few seconds I could not move. I stood there looking at her because my brain could not process what I was seeing. Her blanket was back over her. Her body was in the same place it had been before. She looked peaceful. She looked normal. She looked like she had never gotten out of bed at all. But I had seen her get up. I had seen her run. The blanket had been on the floor. Her bed had been empty. I had searched the entire house because I thought something was wrong. And now she was there, sleeping. I remember looking at the floor where the blanket had been. I remember looking at the bed frame. I remember listening carefully for the sound of her moving. There was nothing. No sign that she had run back. No sound that she had climbed into bed again. No creak from the mattress. No footsteps past my bed. No door opening. Nothing. I just stood there in the dark, trying to understand how she could be asleep in that bed after I had watched her run out of the room. The first thought I had was that maybe she had somehow come back while I was searching. Maybe I had gone into another room at the exact moment she returned. Maybe she passed through the hallway silently. Maybe she managed to get past my bed without waking me or making a sound. But that did not fit. My bed was right next to the door. She would have had to walk directly beside me to get back into the room. She would have had to cross the same space she had crossed when she ran out. I would have seen or heard her, and even if I had somehow missed her walking in, I should have heard her bed. Her bed was creaky. I heard it when she got up. I would have heard it when she laid back down, but I heard nothing. I stayed awake for a long time after that. I do not remember whether I went back to my laptop right away or sat in bed staring across the room. I only remember feeling uncomfortable. I kept watching her bed, waiting for her to sit up again or run out again. She did not. She slept normally. At some point, I must have fallen asleep too. But the next morning, the first thing I wanted to do was ask her about it. I waited until she was awake and then brought it up. I asked her what she had been doing during the night. She looked confused. She said she had not done anything. I asked if she had gotten up. She said no. I asked if she had gone outside the room or checked something in the house. Again, she said no. Then I told her what I saw. I explained that I had been awake on my laptop and watched her sit up. I told her that she ran out of the bedroom so fast that I thought something was wrong. I told her that I searched every room and even looked outside. I told her that when I came back, she was asleep under the blanket as though she had never moved. She laughed, not in a mean way, more like she thought the whole thing was absurd. Then she said something like, "A ghost pranked you." That was it. She did not seem frightened. She did not seem worried that she had done something in her sleep. She did not remember getting up. She did not remember leaving the room. She did not remember anything unusual happening that night. She just laughed and said a ghost must have pranked me. Then we never really talked about it again. That answer did not help me. In some ways, it made it worse. I know she was probably joking. She may have said it because she did not know what else to say. Maybe she did not want to think about the idea of sleepwalking. Maybe she believed I had been tired and imagined it. Maybe she thought it was just a weird story and did not want to make a bigger deal out of it. But I was left with no explanation. I have thought about that night many times since then. The most likely explanation is probably that I saw something while I was tired and somehow misunderstood it. Maybe I had been drifting towards sleep while using my laptop. Maybe I was in that strange space where you feel awake, but your mind is already dreaming. Maybe I saw my mom move in bed, then dreamed the rest. Sleep can do strange things. People can have vivid experiences in the middle of the night. You can hear sounds that are not there. You can confuse dreams with reality. You can see someone in a room and later realize you were not fully awake. That is possible, but I always come back to the details. I remember my laptop. I remember the screen light. I remember her blanket falling onto the floor. I remember her bed being empty. I remember standing in the hallway calling for her. I remember checking the bathroom, kitchen, living room, and outside. I remember how empty the house felt. And I remember returning to the bedroom and seeing her asleep under the blanket. The memory is too clear to feel like an ordinary dream. Another possibility is that my mom sleepwalked. Maybe she got up in her sleep, ran out of the room, wandered around, and somehow returned to bed before I found her. That would explain why she did not remember it. People can sleepwalk without remembering. They can get up, move through a house, speak, do strange things, and later have no memory at all. But that explanation also has problems. She would have had to return to the bedroom without passing me, or she would have had to move past me quietly enough that I somehow missed her, and she would have had to get back into her creaky bed without making a sound. I know it is possible that I missed something. I know memories are imperfect. I know that in a dark house, scared and tired, your brain can fill in gaps, but I still cannot make the timeline fit. I saw her leave. I searched immediately. She was nowhere. Then she was asleep in bed again. There was no moment where I saw her return. No moment where I heard her return. No moment where I heard the bed creak. That is what has always bothered me. It was not just that I thought I saw my mom run out of the room. It was that I followed her. I got up. I searched. I looked everywhere. If I had stayed in bed, I might have convinced myself I had dreamed it. I might have said I saw her leave and then fell asleep again. I might have assumed she came back while I was not paying attention. But I did not stay in bed. I left the room. I checked the house. And then I came back to find her sleeping. The house itself made the whole thing worse. At night, when everyone is asleep, rooms feel different. The kitchen looks bigger. Hallways feel longer. Doors seem darker. Every small sound stands out. I remember walking through the house and feeling like I was the only person awake in the world. The rooms were familiar, but they did not feel familiar. I knew where everything was, but the darkness made it all seem strange. I kept expecting to find my mom standing somewhere, maybe in the kitchen, maybe by a window, maybe in the hallway looking confused. But I never did. There was no sign of her. Only the empty bedroom, the fallen blanket, and then later, her asleep in bed again. I have never seen her do anything like that since. She has never run out of her room in the middle of the night. She has never told me she sleepwalks. She has never mentioned waking up somewhere strange or doing something she did not remember. Nothing similar ever happened again. That almost makes it harder to understand. If it had happened more than once, I could say it was a pattern. Maybe she had some kind of sleep issue. Maybe she moved around at night sometimes. Maybe I had simply never noticed before. But it was one night, one strange moment. Then, nothing. I still wonder whether I really... My buddy Lucas came over to see my new place. I had not been living there very long, so I was still getting used to the house. Everything was unfamiliar in that way a new home always is at first. You do not yet know every creak in the floorboards, every sound the plumbing makes, or how the house settles when the temperature changes outside. At night, normal noises can seem louder because you have not learned which ones belong there. The house was empty except for the furniture I had brought in. There was still that new place feeling in the air, like the rooms did not completely feel lived in yet. Some things were arranged, some things were still being figured out, and I had not developed the usual routine of moving through the house without thinking. Lucas came over to check it out. He had just reached the front door when it happened. We were standing near the entrance, talking casually, probably about the house, the move, or whatever had been going on in our lives. It was not late enough that we expected anything strange. Nothing felt wrong. The front room was dark because we had not gone in there yet, and the only light was coming from the entryway or from outside. Then we heard the couch move. At first, it was just a loud dragging sound from the other room. It was unmistakable. The couch in the front room had been sitting along the far wall. It was heavy, the kind of couch you did not move by accident. You had to grab it, lift part of it, drag it, and put real effort into shifting it across tile floors. But the sound we heard was exactly that. The sound of a heavy couch sliding, not a small scrape, not a chair getting bumped, not something falling over. It was a long, rough sound, like furniture being pulled across the tile one slow, heavy stretch at a time. Lucas and I both stopped talking. We looked at each other. For a second, neither of us said anything. There are certain sounds where you immediately know something is wrong. A house can creak, pipes can knock, wind can rattle a window. But a couch being dragged across a tile floor in an empty room is not a sound you can easily explain away, especially when there should not have been anyone in the house. I remember trying to think of a normal reason for it. Maybe the couch had shifted somehow. Maybe one of the legs had slipped. Maybe the floor was uneven. Maybe something had fallen behind it and pushed it forward. But even as I thought those things, I knew none of them made sense. A couch does not slide across an entire room on its own. Not a heavy couch, not on tile, not loudly enough that you can hear it from the front door. The noise stopped. The silence afterward was worse. Lucas looked at me, and I looked at him. Neither of us wanted to be the first person to say what we were both thinking. Someone could be inside. That was the only explanation that felt possible. Maybe someone had gotten in through a back door. Maybe a window had been left unlocked. Maybe somebody was hiding in the house. Maybe the couch had been moved because someone was searching for something or trying to make a place to hide. The thought made my stomach tighten. I had only recently moved in. I did not yet know every lock, every window, every corner of the property. The idea that someone could already be inside made the entire house feel unsafe. Lucas and I crept down the hallway toward the front room. I remember how quiet we tried to be. The tile under our feet seemed louder than usual. Even breathing felt loud. The hall that normally led to the living area felt longer because neither of us knew what we were going to find when we got there. We did not have weapons in our hands. We did not have a real plan. We were just two people moving slowly through a dark house because we had heard something impossible and felt like we had to check. When we reached the front room, I reached for the light switch. For a second, I hesitated. Part of me did not want to turn it on. It sounds stupid, but turning on the light meant confirming whether someone was there. Before the light came on, there was still the possibility that we had misunderstood the sound. Maybe it had come from outside. Maybe it had come from another part of the house. Maybe we were about to walk into an empty room and laugh at ourselves. But I flipped the switch. The light came on. The couch was in the middle of the room. It had been against the far wall. I knew where I had put it. I knew how much effort it took to move it there in the first place. The couch had been sitting along the wall where it belonged, leaving the center of the room open. Now it was out in the middle, not slightly moved, not crooked, not tipped over. It had been dragged away from the wall and left sitting in open space. For a moment, I could not speak. Lucas could not either. The room was empty. There was no one behind the couch, no one crouched in a corner, no broken window, no obvious sign that anyone had come through the house. Just the couch, sitting in the middle of the room like someone had deliberately pulled it there and walked away. I remember looking at the tile floor. I expected to see something. Drag marks, dirt, wet footprints, a dropped item, anything that would tell me how the couch had moved. But there was nothing obvious. The room looked normal except for the couch. That was the first thing that really shook me. It would have been frightening to find an intruder. It would have been dangerous, but at least it would have made sense. Someone inside the house could move a couch. But we found no one. The house was still. Lucas and I stood there staring at the furniture, trying to figure out what to do next. Then we heard something in the backyard. At first it sounded like a heavy step, then another, then another. It was not the sound of a person walking near the fence. It was not a dog running around. It was not a small animal moving through leaves. It sounded massive. The footsteps were heavy enough that I could feel them in the ground. That is what made it so frightening. The sound did not just reach my ears. It seemed to come up through the floor. Each step had weight behind it, like something huge was moving across the yard outside. Thump, thump, thump. The house was quiet enough that every impact stood out. Lucas and I froze again. The couch was already in the middle of the room. The house was already wrong. And now something large was walking in the backyard. I remember feeling nervous in a completely different way than before. Before, I had been worried there was a person inside. Now, I did not know what to think. A person could make footsteps. A person could move furniture. A person could hide in a house. But whatever was walking outside did not sound like a person. It sounded too heavy. The ground seemed to respond to each step. I did not want to go near the back door. Everything in me said not to. But I also did not want to stand in the front room and wait for whatever it was to come closer. The not knowing was worse than the sound itself. I needed to see if it was a person, an animal, a vehicle, or something simple that only sounded bigger because of the quiet. So I moved slowly toward the back door. Lucas stayed close behind me at first, but I could tell he was just as nervous as I was. We were both trying to act calm, trying to make jokes in our heads maybe, trying to convince ourselves it was a deer or a neighbor or something that would make sense. The closer I got to the door, the quieter the footsteps became. Or maybe they stopped. I do not remember hearing them right up against the house. I remember a sudden stillness, like whatever had been walking in the yard was no longer moving. That was almost worse. I reached the back door and peeked out. The yard looked empty. There was darkness, the outline of the fence, the back of the garage, and whatever light the house gave off through the windows. I could not see anything standing near the door. At first, I felt a little relieved. Maybe it had been a deer, maybe the sound had traveled strangely, maybe something had knocked over a trash bin or hit the side of the garage. Maybe the ground-shaking footsteps had been my imagination reacting to the couch moving. But I did not fully believe that. The backyard was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel as though something is still there, just out of sight. I turned on the outside light. The yard brightened a little, though not enough to reveal every corner. The light made parts of the grass and fence visible, but beyond that, the darkness remained thick. The back of the garage was partly lit, while the space beside it stayed mostly black. I looked around carefully. At first, I did not see anything, just darkness. Then the darkness moved. That is the only way I can describe it. I was looking past the back of the garage. The shadowy area there seemed empty at first, almost like a normal patch of night where the light did not reach. But then something in that dark shape shifted, not like a tree branch moving, not like an animal darting low to the ground. It moved upward and sideways in a way that made me realize there was a shape there, a huge shape. The top of it was near the top of the back wall of the garage. I could not make out a face. I could not make out hands, legs, clothing, or anything that would let me say what it was. I only saw the height, the outline, the way it seemed to rise out of the darkness behind the garage. It had to be at least 10 feet tall. That may sound impossible, but I knew the height of the garage. I knew where the roofline and walls sat against the darkness. The top of that shadow seemed to reach near the top of the back wall. For a moment, I stood there trying to force my eyes to understand it. Maybe it was something stacked behind the garage. Maybe it was a tarp blowing in the wind. Maybe it was a tree shadow cast at a strange angle. Maybe the outside light had made an ordinary object look taller than it was. But then it moved again. The darkness itself shifted, and I knew I was looking at something that was not supposed to be there. Lucas saw enough. He did not wait for an explanation. He ran. He bolted through the front door, ran straight to his car, and left. I do not blame him. If anything, I think he had the smartest reaction out of both of us. The house had already done something neither of us could explain. Then something massive had been walking in the backyard. Then there was a shadow behind the garage tall enough to make both of us question what we were seeing. Lucas got out. He left me alone in the house. I remember hearing his car start, then the sound of him driving away. And suddenly, the quiet inside the house became unbearable. I was alone. The couch was still sitting in the middle of the front room. The backyard was outside the window. The garage was behind the house, and I had no idea whether the thing I saw was still there. I did not go back to the window. I did not try to get a better look. I did not go outside. I started locking everything. Every window, every door, every lock I could check. I went through the house with that desperate feeling people get after something frightens them badly enough that they start trying to make the world solid again. Lock the door. Check the window. Turn on lights. Make sure the house is closed. Make sure nothing can come in. I locked the front door. I locked the back door. I checked the windows. I checked them again. I made sure the blinds and curtains were closed as much as possible. I did not want to look into the yard. I did not want to see that shadow again. I kept thinking about the couch. That was the part that made it hard to calm down. If the problem had only been something outside, I might have told myself it was a big animal or a trick of the light. But the couch had moved inside the house before I heard anything in the yard. Something had dragged it across the tile. Lucas and I both heard it. Then we both saw where it ended up. That was real. At least it was real enough that neither of us could explain it. I called the cops. I did not know what else to do. I remember trying to explain it without sounding insane. I probably told them that I heard something moving around, that I thought there might be someone outside, that there was something large in the backyard, and that I was alone in a new house. I may not have led with the couch moving on its own. How do you even say that to police without hearing how it sounds? Someone moved my couch, but nobody is inside. There is a massive shadow behind my garage. The ground shook when it walked. None of it sounded normal, but I was scared enough that I did not care whether I sounded ridiculous. I needed someone else there. The police came and looked around the property. By then, the backyard looked empty. There was no huge shadow by the garage. There was no animal standing in the light. There was no person hiding behind the wall. They checked the area around the house. They looked around the garage. They checked the yard for signs that someone had been there. I waited inside, trying to listen to every word they said, trying to read their expressions, hoping they would find something that made sense. They did find one thing. Behind the garage was an old light fixture. It was supposed to light up the area behind the garage, but it had no bulb in it. The fixture itself had been crushed, not simply broken. Crushed, like a soda can. I remember staring at it, trying to understand how that could happen. A light fixture can get damaged, weather can wear things down, someone can kick it, hit it, or pull it loose. Old fixtures can rust. Plastic can crack. Metal can bend. But crushed like a soda can? That did not feel normal. It looked like something had put a huge amount of force on it. The police did not find a clear explanation. Maybe they thought it had been vandalism. Maybe they thought someone had been on the property. Maybe they assumed an animal had gotten into the yard and knocked things around. Maybe they had no idea what to make of the couch, the footsteps, or the crushed fixture. I do not know what they said privately to each other, but they did not find a person. They did not find a giant animal. They did not find anything that explained why Lucas and I had heard the couch slide across the floor. After they left, I did not feel better. Sometimes having police check a house makes you feel safe, because it proves there is nothing there. That night, it did not. Because they found enough to make the situation stranger without finding enough to make it understandable. There was the couch in the middle of the room. There were the footsteps we both heard. There was the shadow behind the garage. And there was the crushed light fixture. I kept thinking about the height of the shadow. Maybe I had misjudged it. Maybe the darkness had stretched something ordinary into a shape that looked huge. A tall object behind the garage might have cast a shadow across the wall. A tree branch could have moved in the wind. A person standing on something could have looked taller from the angle of the back door. But the ground-shaking steps did not fit that explanation, and the crushed fixture did not fit it either. I have tried to put the pieces together over the years. Maybe there was an intruder in the house. Maybe someone moved the couch and then left through a back door without us seeing them. Maybe the footsteps outside were an animal, something like a deer or a large dog moving close to the house. Maybe the shadow was a trick of the outside light, the garage, and the trees. Maybe the crushed fixture had been damaged days or weeks before, and I only noticed it because the police were looking around. All of those things are possible when you separate them, but together they do not feel like separate events. The couch moved. Then something walked outside. Then the darkness behind the garage moved. It all happened in one stretch of time, and Lucas was there for the first part of it. That matters to me. I was not alone when we heard the couch. I was not alone when we walked into the front room and found it in the middle of the floor. Lucas heard it too. He saw it too. When the footsteps started, he heard those too. When I looked toward the garage, I do not know exactly how much of the shadow he saw before he ran, but he knew enough to leave immediately. That is why I have never been able to write it off as only my imagination. Maybe fear made some details bigger. Maybe the shadow looked taller because I was already terrified. Maybe I misunderstood how far away it was or what the light was doing. But the couch did not move because of fear. It had been against the wall. Then it was in the middle of the room. I still think about what would have happened if Lucas had not been there. If I had heard the couch slide while I was alone, I might have convinced myself it was a dream, a plumbing sound, or something shifting in the house. If I had walked in and seen the couch moved, I might have assumed I had misremembered where I left it. But Lucas was standing with me at the front door. He heard the sound. He walked down the hall with me. He saw the couch in the middle of the room. The fact that he immediately ran to his car when things got worse tells me he felt something was wrong too. After that night, the house did not feel new anymore. It felt watched. Not in a way I could prove. Not in a way where I could say something was definitely living there. But every room seemed different after that. The front room made me think of the couch. The back door made me think of the footsteps. The garage made me think of the huge dark outline rising behind it. And every time I looked toward the old crushed light fixture, I remembered how the police had found it crumpled, like something had stepped on it or squeezed it. I checked locks more often after that. I left lights on. I avoided standing at the back window at night. I did not like being alone in the house. Even ordinary noises became harder to ignore. A branch moving outside could make me freeze. A car door closing down the street could make me listen for footsteps. A piece of furniture settling could make me look toward the front room. The fear did not disappear quickly. And the strangest part is that I never got an answer. No one came forward and said they had been in the house. No neighbor explained the noise. No giant animal was found on the property. No one told us the garage light had been crushed in some obvious accident. Nothing made the events fit together. Maybe there was a simple explanation for every part of it. Maybe the couch had been moved by a person who entered and left before we realized. Maybe the footsteps belonged to something ordinary. Maybe the shadow was only a shadow. Maybe the light fixture had been damaged long before that night, but I know how it felt. I know what Lucas and I heard. I know what we saw when the front room light came on. And I know that when I looked behind the garage, the darkness moved. Whatever was there was huge enough to make me feel small inside my own backyard. That night taught me something I have never forgotten. Sometimes the scariest part is not seeing a clear monster. Sometimes it is seeing just enough to know that something is there, but not enough to understand what it is. A couch dragging across tile in an empty room, footsteps heavy enough to shake the ground, a shadow taller than the garage wall, a light fixture crushed flat behind the house, and no explanation that ever made any of it feel normal. We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal. When I was about 10 years old, my family was driving home really late from my grandpa's house. My grandpa lived far out in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place that felt remote even during the day. The roads around his house were long, narrow, and surrounded by dark fields, trees, and empty land. There were very few homes nearby, and once the sun went down, there was almost nothing to see except the road in front of you and whatever the truck headlights managed to catch. At night, the drive home always felt longer. During the day, I could look out the window and see farms, old barns, mailboxes, trees, open fields, and the occasional small business along the road. But after dark, all of that disappeared. The world outside the truck became mostly black, broken only by headlights, distant porch lights, and the rare glow of another car coming toward us. That night, it was my dad driving his truck. My mom was in the passenger seat, and my two sisters and I were in the back. I do not remember exactly where everyone was sitting, but I remember all of us being tired. We had probably spent the day at my grandpa's house, eating, talking, visiting family, and doing all the normal things that happen when relatives get together. By the time we left, it was late enough that my sisters and I were probably supposed to be asleep. But I was awake. I remember looking out the windows and watching the darkness go by. The truck engine made that steady, low sound that can make you sleepy when you are a kid riding in the back seat. The road seemed empty. There were no streetlights for long stretches. Sometimes the headlights would catch a road sign, a tree, an animal near the edge of a field, or the reflective eyes of something far away in the dark. Most of the ride was quiet. My parents may have been talking softly in the front. My sisters may have been half asleep. I remember the feeling of being safe inside the truck, even though the road outside seemed endless and lonely. Then we passed an old gas station. It was the kind of gas station you only notice because everything else around it is so dark. It looked old, maybe closed, maybe barely used. I do not remember whether the pumps were working or whether there was a sign lit up, but I remember it sitting there alone beside the road. It did not look like one of the bright, busy gas stations you see in towns. There were no rows of cars, no people standing outside, no bright convenience store windows, no traffic. Just an old building or old pumps near the road, surrounded by darkness. As we came closer, something appeared in front of the truck. A girl. She was so close that I still cannot believe my dad did not hit her. She seemed to appear out of nowhere, directly in front of the moving truck. Not far down the road, not standing near the gas station, not crossing from a visible side road. She was suddenly there, maybe only 2 feet in front of the truck. It happened so fast that nobody had time to understand it. 1 second, we were driving normally. The next second, there was a girl in front of us. I remember what she was wearing. Her clothes looked old-fashioned, like something from an old western town. Not modern clothes. Not jeans and a hoodie. Not anything that would look normal for someone standing beside a rural road late at night. She looked like she belonged in a different time. The clothing had that old Western feeling, like a dress or outfit you might see in an old photograph, a historical film, or one of those tourist towns designed to look like the past. I remember thinking that even though I was only 10, because it was so obvious that her clothes did not match the time or place, I could see her hair too. It was brown and curly. That detail has stayed with me all these years. She was close enough, and the truck headlights were bright enough that I could see her clearly. I could see the shape of her hair. I could see the way the light hit her clothing. I could see that she was not just a vague shadow in the road. She looked like a real person. That was what made it so terrifying. Everyone screamed. My sisters screamed. My mom screamed. I screamed. And my dad slammed on the brakes. He did not just slow down. He hit the brakes hard, like someone does when they believe they are about to hit a person. The truck skidded down the road. I remember the sudden, violent feeling of being thrown forward against the seatbelt or the seat in front of me. The tires made that awful sliding sound. The truck shook. For a few seconds, everything was chaos. There was screaming, the sound of tires on the road, my dad trying to control the truck, and all of us reacting at once. I remember thinking we had hit her. There was no way we could not have. She had been directly in front of us. She had been so close that there was no time for the truck to stop before reaching her. But we never heard an impact. There was no heavy thud, no sound of a body hitting the hood, no crack against the windshield, no bump under the tires. Nothing. The truck finally came to a stop. For a moment, nobody moved. I think all of us were trying to understand what had just happened. The headlights were shining down the road. The old gas station was somewhere behind or beside us. The truck engine was still running. The air inside the cab felt frozen, even though everyone had been screaming seconds earlier. Then all of us girls turned around in our seats. We whipped around as fast as we could, looking through the back window, trying to see if she was behind the truck. There was nothing there. No girl lying in the road. No person running away. No movement. Nothing. My mom and dad got out of the truck. I remember them moving quickly, probably afraid that they had hit someone and the person had been thrown into a ditch or off the side of the road. My dad had been driving, and he was the one who had slammed on the brakes. My mom was just as shocked, and I remember both of them getting out to look. We stayed in the truck. I do not remember whether the doors were locked, but I remember feeling like we were not supposed to get out. We were children, and our parents were trying to figure out whether someone was hurt. They got flashlights. The road was dark enough that the truck headlights only showed part of the area. Beyond that were ditches, grass, brush, and darkness. My parents searched around the truck. They looked at the road. They looked near the old gas station. They looked into the ditches and along the edges of the road. They searched for at least 30 minutes. Maybe it was a little less or a little more, but it felt like a long time to us in the truck. We sat there waiting. The entire time, I expected my dad or mom to find her. I expected them to call out that someone was hurt. I expected to hear my dad say they found a person in the grass. I expected the police to be called. I expected something real to happen after something so terrible. But they found nothing. No girl, no footprints, no blood, no torn clothing, no sign that anyone had been standing in the road, no sign that anyone had been hit, no damage to the truck. That was one of the things that made it so impossible to understand. My dad had slammed on the brakes hard enough that the truck skidded. We all believed there had been someone in front of us. The girl had been so close that I could see her hair, yet the truck did not have a mark on it. There was no dent, no broken headlight, no scratch on the hood, no damage to the windshield, nothing, and we had not heard anything hit the truck in the first place. That detail confused me even as a child. I knew enough to understand that if a truck hit a person, There would be a sound. There would be some kind of impact. The truck would shake differently. There would be something. But there had been nothing. The girl had appeared in front of the truck. My dad had braked. The truck had skidded. Then she was gone. I remember watching my parents from inside the truck as they moved around with flashlights. Their beams cut through the darkness, sweeping over the road, the grass, the edges of the gas station, and the spaces between trees or abandoned-looking objects nearby. Every time the flashlight moved across a patch of darkness, I expected to see her. I expected the beam to catch the old-fashioned dress. I expected to see curly brown hair. I expected her to be standing somewhere beside the road, looking back at us. But there was nothing. The old gas station looked even stranger while we sat there. It was just a dark place beside the road, with no one around and no clear reason for a young girl to be there at that hour. I remember thinking that it did not feel like a place anybody should be standing alone, especially dressed in clothing from another time. Eventually, my parents came back to the truck. They were quiet. That was the part that made everything feel more serious. Normally, after something frightening, adults try to make children feel better. They explain things. They say it was okay. They say it was a deer, a shadow, a person who ran away, or something that makes sense. But my parents did not have an explanation. They had looked. They had checked the truck. They had searched the road. And they had found nothing. We all got back in. Everyone buckled up. Then my dad started driving again. The entire ride home was silent. Not quiet in the normal tired family after a long day away. Silent, nobody wanted to speak. Nobody wanted to ask what we had seen. Nobody wanted to be the first one to say the word ghost or talk about the girl in the road. I remember sitting in the back seat, staring out the window at the darkness, replaying the moment in my mind. The old gas station. The girl. The brown curly hair. The old Western-style clothes. Her being directly in front of the truck. The screaming. The brakes. Then nothing. I kept wondering whether we had all seen the same thing. That may sound strange, because we were all in the truck and all screamed. But when something impossible happens, you start questioning your own memory almost immediately. You wonder whether people were screaming because they saw the girl or because the truck suddenly braked. You wonder whether each person saw the same details. You wonder whether your mind added parts afterward because you were so afraid. But I knew I saw her, and I knew everyone reacted. The silence on the drive home felt like proof that it had happened. Nobody joked. Nobody said it was nothing. Nobody tried to make fun of anybody for being scared. We just drove. By the time we got home, it was late enough that everyone was exhausted. I do not remember whether we talked about it when we got inside. I do not remember whether my parents said anything to us before bed. What I do remember is that we never really spoke about it again. That was the strangest part. It was like the whole family silently agreed to put it away. Maybe nobody knew how to explain it. Maybe my parents did not want to scare us more. Maybe they had their own reasons for not wanting to talk about it. My dad had been driving. My mom had seen it too. They had gotten out in the dark and searched for someone they believed might be hurt, only to find nothing at all. That kind of experience would stay with anyone. As I got older, I started thinking about it more. When I was 10, I mostly knew that something frightening had happened. I did not have the language for it. I did not know about local history, haunted roads, old gas stations, stories of apparitions, or the kinds of things people say when they try to explain encounters like that. I only knew that a girl appeared in the road and disappeared before we could hit her. But as an adult, I have tried to find answers. I have done research. I have looked for news articles about accidents in that area. I have tried to find anything about a woman or girl being hit near an old gas station. I have searched for historical records. I have looked for local stories, Old newspaper reports, roadside deaths, unsolved accidents, or anything that could explain why a girl in old-fashioned clothing might appear there. I have wondered whether someone died on that road. Maybe a young woman. Maybe a girl traveling with family long ago. Maybe someone connected to the old gas station. Maybe there had been an accident there that people forgot, except for whatever story stayed attached to the place. So far, I have not found anything that gives me a clear answer. That almost makes it harder. If I found a newspaper article about a woman who died there decades ago, I would still not know for sure that it was connected, but at least I would have something. A name, a date, a reason the memory felt like it had a history behind it, but nothing has fit. I have found no clear report, no obvious accident, no record that makes me say, that has to be her. And I know that does not prove anything. A lack of records does not mean nothing happened. Old accidents may not be easy to find. Small local stories may never have made it into newspapers. The location may have changed over time. The gas station may be gone now, renamed, moved, or remembered differently than it was when I was a child. Or maybe there was no historical story at all. Maybe the girl was a real person. Maybe she had been walking near the gas station and somehow moved out of the way before the truck reached her. Maybe the darkness made her seem closer than she was. Maybe she ran into a ditch or behind the building before my parents got out. But I do not know how she could have done that. She was directly in front of the truck, and my parents searched for 30 minutes. They looked with flashlights. They checked the road. They checked the ditches. They found nothing. Maybe the truck never got as close to her as I remember. That is possible too. I was 10 years old. Fear can change distance. A person who is 10 feet away can feel like they are 2 feet away when a vehicle is moving toward them. A fast moment can become sharper and more dramatic in memory, but the braking was real. The skidding was real. The screaming was real. The way everyone reacted was real. And I remember seeing her features clearly enough to know she was not just a shadow. The old clothing still bothers me most. If she had been wearing modern clothes, I might have assumed she was someone walking near the road. If she had been a vague outline, I might have blamed headlights, fog, or a trick of the dark. But she looked like someone from a different time, not in a perfect costume-like way, more like she belonged somewhere else. The brown curls, the old Western-style clothing, the fact that she seemed to appear rather than step out from somewhere visible. It felt like she had not come from the side of the road at all. She was simply there. Then she was gone. Sometimes I wonder whether that old gas station had anything to do with it. Old roadside places can hold strange feelings, even when nothing paranormal has ever happened there. They sit alone beside roads. They collect history. They change owners. They close down. They become empty buildings people drive past without thinking much about them. At night, they can look like they belong to another era. A closed gas station beside an empty road already has a lonely feeling. Add a girl in old-fashioned clothing appearing in front of a truck, and it becomes the kind of memory that never stops replaying itself. I do not know if the gas station was abandoned. I do not know if it was still open. I do not know whether anyone lived nearby. I only know that nobody came out during the half hour my parents searched. No lights turned on. No person asked what was happening. No car drove up. No one gave us an explanation. It was just our family, the truck, the road, and the dark building beside it. The fact that all of us saw something makes it harder for me to dismiss. If I had been alone, I might have convinced myself that I dreamed it. I might have assumed I was tired and saw a shape in the headlights. I might have blamed my imagination. But it was my dad, my mom, my sisters, and me. We all reacted. We all screamed. My dad stopped the truck. because he saw her too. My mom got out and searched because she believed someone might have been hit. The experience did not belong to just one person's memory. It belonged to all of us. And yet, we never talked about it. Maybe that was because talking about it would have made it feel more real. Maybe each of us was waiting for someone else to explain it first. Maybe my parents decided it was better not to make their children more afraid. Maybe my sisters remember it differently. I have wondered whether I should ask them now. As an adult, I sometimes want to bring it up and compare memories. I want to know whether they remember the girl's clothes the way I do. I want to know whether they remember her hair. I want to know whether they saw her disappear or only saw the truck break. But another part of me does not want to ask. Because what if they remember it exactly the same way? What if they remember the old Western clothing, the brown curls, the headlights, the empty road, and the long search afterward? That would make it harder to explain. And what if they do not remember it at all? That might be even stranger. To this day, it remains one of the weirdest nights of my life. Not only because of what I saw, but because of what did not happen. We did not hit anyone. We did not find anyone. There was no damage to the truck. There was no sound of impact. There was no report afterward. There was no explanation waiting for us at home. Just a memory of a girl who appeared in front of the truck and vanished before we could reach her. Maybe there is a rational answer I have not found. Maybe the road, the headlights, the darkness, and the speed of the truck created an illusion that all of us experienced in slightly different ways. Maybe there was a person who got away before anyone could see where she went. Maybe the old gas station made the setting feel stranger than it was. Maybe history is not written down as neatly as we think it is, and someday I will find an old report that explains everything. But until then, I only have the memory. A remote road late at night, my family tired and heading home. An old gas station in the darkness. A young girl in clothes that looked like they came from an old western town. Brown, curly hair caught in the headlights. Everyone screaming. My dad hitting the brakes. The truck sliding down the road. Then silence. Then an empty road. And a mystery none of us ever found the words to explain. Back in 2018, my girlfriend and I decided to have a small picnic lunch in a field next to a Yemka in her town. We had only recently gotten together, so everything still felt new between us. We were in that early stage where even simple plans felt exciting because we were just happy to spend time together. We did not need anything expensive or complicated. A walk, a drive, lunch somewhere quiet, sitting outside and talking for a while, those things were enough. That day, we had packed a small lunch and decided to eat in an open field near the Yimka. It was a bright, ordinary-looking place. There was a large stretch of grass, wide enough that you could see across most of it without anything blocking your view. It was the kind of field that probably got used for sports, kids running around, community activities, or people cutting through on their way somewhere else. At the bottom of the field, there were some trees. They were not especially unusual at first glance, just a small wooded edge where the open grass gave way to darker trunks, branches, and undergrowth. In daylight, the trees looked attractive. There was something peaceful about them. They gave the field a little depth, made the space feel less empty, and provided a nice view from where we sat. We picked a place in the grass and settled in. I remember we had peanut butter sandwiches. It was not some perfect romantic picnic from a movie. We were not sitting under a fancy blanket with baskets and candles. It was simple. We had food, drinks, maybe a small bag or backpack with us, and enough time to sit together without being rushed. At first, everything felt normal. We talked. We ate. We probably laughed about something small. The weather was good enough to be outside, and the field had that quiet, open feeling that makes you forget about everything else for a while. The Yimka was nearby, but we were far enough away from the building that it did not feel crowded. There may have been distant sounds from cars, people, or activity near the property, but where we were sitting, it felt mostly still. Then, almost immediately after we started eating, something began bothering me. I could not stop looking toward the edge of the woods. There was one particular spot. It was maybe 30 feet away from us, close enough that I could have walked over to it quickly if I wanted to, but far enough that I could not make out every detail of the ground beneath the trees. It was just a section of woods near the field, a place where the trees stood a little darker and the grass seemed to end. There was nothing obvious there. That is important. I did not see a person standing between the trees. I did not hear someone calling. I did not see an animal moving in the brush. There was no blood, no broken branches, no abandoned object, no sign warning people away, no strange smell, and no clear reason that the spot should have caught my attention. But it did. From the moment we sat down, I felt drawn toward it. Not in a curious way. Not like I saw something interesting and wanted a closer look. It felt more like my mind kept returning to it even when I tried to focus on something else. I would look at my girlfriend while she was talking, then my eyes would drift back toward the trees. I would take a bite of my sandwich, then feel the urge to glance toward that same dark spot. I would try to listen to the sounds around us, but my attention kept narrowing toward the edge of the woods. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe there was a shadow there that looked strange from where I sat. Maybe one of the tree trunks had an odd shape. Maybe there was a patch of darkness where the branches crossed, and my brain had decided it looked like something. People see things in trees all the time. A knot in bark can look like a face. A broken branch can look like an arm. A line of shadow can look like a person standing still. Once your mind picks out a shape, it can be hard to stop seeing it. That was what I thought at first. I tried to keep eating. I tried to keep the mood light. We had come out there to enjoy ourselves. We were new together, and I did not want to ruin the moment by acting strange over a patch of woods. I did not want to be the person who turned a simple picnic into something uncomfortable, because I had decided a tree line gave me bad vibes. So I said nothing. For a while, I just kept trying to ignore it. But the feeling did not go away. It grew. The longer we sat there, the more uncomfortable I became. It was not like being startled by something. Nothing jumped out. Nothing moved. Nothing happened in an obvious way. It was a slow, heavy dread. The kind of feeling that settles into your chest and makes it difficult to enjoy anything else. I remember holding my sandwich and suddenly realizing I did not want to eat anymore. I was hungry when we arrived. I had been looking forward to lunch, but I could not make myself take another bite. My appetite seemed to disappear completely. I kept looking at that one spot. It felt like there was something wrong there, not something I could see, not something I could explain, just an overwhelming sense that I should not be sitting in that field. I kept asking myself why. What exactly was making me uncomfortable? The field was open. It was daylight. We were near a public place. There were no obvious signs of danger. We were not deep in the woods or far away from people. The Yimka was nearby. We were not in some abandoned building or isolated country road where it would be easy to imagine something lurking in the dark. This was a normal field, and yet I felt like the woods were watching us. I did not tell my girlfriend right away because I did not want to sound ridiculous. We had just gotten together. You want to make a good impression in the beginning. You want the other person to see your normal, relaxed side. You do not want to be sitting there on a picnic blanket saying, I think something is wrong with those trees. I worried she might laugh. I worried she might think I was trying to be dramatic. I worried she might think I was just nervous because we were alone together in a new place. But eventually, I could not keep it to myself anymore. The feeling had become too strong. I looked at her and asked if she felt weird there. I did not say exactly what I was feeling at first. I think I probably tried to make it sound casual. Something like, "Do you feel kind of strange here?" Or, "Does this place feel off to you?" I expected her to say no. I expected her to look at me and say, "What are you talking about?" Maybe she would tell me I was imagining things. Maybe she would laugh and say it was just a field. Instead, she looked toward the woods. Then she said that something felt absolutely wrong there. That was the moment everything changed. Until then, I had been trying to convince myself the feeling was only mine. I thought I might be tired, distracted, anxious, or just getting caught up in a weird thought, but she felt it too. She did not say she saw something. She did not point to a person or an animal. She did not claim there was a ghost or some kind of creature in the trees. She only said that something about the woods beyond where we were sitting felt wrong. Not mildly uncomfortable. Not just creepy in the way woods can be creepy. Wrong. I remember looking at her and feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief because I was not alone in the feeling. Fear because someone else was picking up on the same thing. We both sat there quietly for a moment. The field had not changed. The grass was still moving slightly in the breeze. The trees were still standing in the same place. The sky was the same. Nothing had happened. But now, we were both focused on the edge of the woods. It was like the entire field had become smaller. The open grass no longer felt open. The trees no longer looked peaceful. That dark area at the bottom of the field had become the center of everything. I remember thinking that something really bad had happened there. I do not know why I thought that. There was no proof, no evidence, no story anyone had told us. We had not seen a memorial, police tape, a damaged building, or anything that suggested a specific event. It was only a feeling. But it was strong enough that both of us seemed to reach the same conclusion without saying much. Something about that place felt heavy. It felt like the ground itself held on to something. Again, I know how strange that sounds. A field is just a field. Trees are just trees. A dark patch under a wooded edge can feel unsettling because it is darker than the open grass around it. Our minds are built to pay attention to places we cannot see into clearly. That is a normal survival instinct. We are more alert when there is a hidden space nearby, especially when we are sitting with our backs exposed. Maybe that was all it was. Maybe the woods looked dark enough that both of us felt uneasy without realizing why. Maybe there had been animal movement in the brush that we heard without consciously noticing. Maybe there was an odd smell, a change in temperature, a sound, or a visual detail that our brains picked up on before we understood it. Maybe the place had no bad history at all. But in that moment, none of those possibilities mattered. The dread was real. It was strong enough that neither of us wanted to stay. We did not finish our sandwiches. We did not try to laugh it off. We did not walk over to investigate. We packed up and left. I remember how quickly that decision happened. There was no long discussion. Neither of us said, "Let's stay a little longer and see if the feeling goes away." Neither of us wanted to be brave about it. We just agreed that it was time to go. I do not remember if we ran. I do not think we did. But I remember moving faster than usual as we gathered our things. We picked up the food, the bag, whatever we had brought, and got out of that field. I kept looking toward the woods as we left. I did not see anything. No person, no animal, no movement, no face between the trees, no figures stepping out from the shadow. That almost made it worse. If we had seen something, even something frightening, at least we would have known why we felt so uncomfortable. A person hiding in the woods would have explained it. A large animal could have explained it. A strange sound or some obvious danger could have given our fear a reason. But there was nothing, only the feeling. We left the field and headed back toward town, the Yimka, the road, or wherever we had parked. The moment we got farther away from the trees, I started feeling a little more normal. Not completely. The dread did not disappear right away. It followed me for a while, like an aftertaste. I kept replaying the moment we sat down and the way my attention had immediately been pulled toward that one spot. I kept thinking about how I could not eat. I kept thinking about how my girlfriend had felt it too. We were new together. That is something I think about a lot when I remember the day. We barely knew each other at that point. We had not spent years sharing stories or building the kind of closeness where you can easily influence each other's reactions. We had not spent enough time together for one of us to know exactly how the other thought or what kind of fears they had. That is why her answer shook me. I had not said, "I think something terrible happened in those woods." I had only asked if she felt weird, and she said yes. She felt that something was wrong beyond the field. It made me wonder whether places can carry a feeling. I do not mean that as proof of anything paranormal. I do not know whether places can truly hold memories, trauma, or some kind of energy. I do not know whether a bad event leaves something behind that people can sense years later. But I know that some places feel different. Most people have experienced that at least once. You walk into a room and immediately feel uncomfortable without knowing why. You sit in a house that looks normal but feel like you should leave. You drive down a road and get the sudden urge to turn around. Sometimes there is a logical reason. Maybe the lighting is bad. Maybe the building smells stale. Maybe the room is too quiet. Maybe you notice subtle signs that your mind has processed before you can name them. Other times, you never find out. That field felt like one of those places. It was beautiful in a simple way. Wide grass, open sky, trees at the bottom of the slope, a quiet spot near a public building where two people could sit and eat lunch. Nothing about it should have frightened us, but the feeling was stronger than our plans for the day. We had only been there for a short time, and it was enough to make us leave. I have thought about going back. Part of me has wanted to return during the day and see whether the place feels different now. Maybe it was only the weather, the mood, or the fact that we had just met and were both a little nervous in our own ways. Maybe the woods look completely ordinary. Maybe the field is now used by kids, families, and people walking dogs. Maybe there is a path through the trees that explains the feeling. Maybe the area has been cleaned up, changed, developed, or made more open since then. But another part of me does not want to go back. The memory of that day is enough. I do not need to prove it. I do not need to find a dark history attached to the land. I do not need to stand in the same place again and see whether the feeling returns. The fact that both of us felt it once was enough. Sometimes I wonder whether something could have been buried there, not in a supernatural sense. Maybe something ordinary but disturbing. Maybe an animal had died in the woods. Maybe someone had dumped trash or something rotten nearby. Maybe there was an old drainage area, a hidden structure, or some place that had seen something bad long before we ever showed up. Maybe there was a reason the trees felt wrong. But I never saw evidence of anything. We did not go closer. We did not search the area. We did not ask anyone at the IMCA if something had happened there. We did not look up local records afterward. At the time, we were too uncomfortable to be curious. We just wanted distance. That is what I remember most clearly, the way dread can override everything else. We had gone there to have a nice afternoon. We had packed peanut butter sandwiches. We were sitting in an open field, trying to enjoy being together. Then something changed. I could not eat. My girlfriend felt it too. And all the excitement of being in a new relationship, all the warmth of a simple picnic, all the reasons we had come out there in the first place, disappeared under one shared instinct. Leave. We got out of that field. I have never forgotten it. Not because something jumped out at us. Not because we saw a ghost, heard a scream, or found something hidden in the woods. Nothing dramatic happened. That is what makes the story difficult to tell. It was only a feeling, but it was the kind of feeling that fills your body and makes you question your own instincts. It was the kind of dread that makes you stop eating, stop talking, and keep looking toward a place you do not want to look at. And when someone beside you quietly says they feel it too, the feeling becomes impossible to ignore. Maybe the woods were completely harmless. Maybe there was never anything there. Maybe our minds were reacting to the darkness beneath the trees and the unfamiliar quiet of the field. Maybe we simply had the same nervous reaction at the same time. But that day, in 2018, it felt like something really bad had happened at the edge of those woods. We could not explain it. We did not stay to find out. And I still cannot shake the feeling that leaving was the right thing to do. A friend of mine and I were sleeping in the same bed one night. It was a large bed, big enough for 3 people comfortably. There was plenty of room between us, and we were each lying near the far edge on our own side. It was not one of those small beds where you expect to bump into the other person every time you turn over. There should have been enough space for both of us to sleep without touching at all. I do not remember exactly where we were staying, but I remember the room well enough to know that it did not feel crowded. There was a balcony nearby, and the bed faced part of the room where the ceiling and windows were visible in the dark. It was one of those nights where you are tired enough to fall asleep quickly, but not tired enough for your body to completely relax. At some point during the night, I started feeling touches. At first, I assumed it was my friend. That was the obvious answer. Even in a wide bed, people shift while sleeping. Someone rolls over, someone stretches an arm, someone moves a leg or bumps the mattress hard enough that you feel it on the other side. I thought maybe he was moving closer in his sleep without realizing it. But the touches did not feel like ordinary movement. They were small, light. Sometimes they felt like a hand brushing against me. Sometimes it was like an elbow touching my side. Sometimes it was just a quick pressure against my arm or shoulder. The kind of touch that makes you immediately think someone is trying to get your attention. At first, I tried to ignore it. I kept thinking, he is probably half asleep. Maybe he is looking for his phone. Maybe he is moving around and does not realize how close he is getting. Still, the bed was huge. I was at one extreme edge of it. He was on the other side. There was enough room that I kept wondering why he would be touching me at all. The more it happened, the more uncomfortable I became. I did not want to make a big deal out of it in the middle of the night. I did not want to wake him up and accuse him of doing something he might not even be aware of. At the same time, I could not fully relax because I kept expecting another touch. I remember lying there with my eyes closed, trying to listen to his breathing and figure out whether he was asleep. The room was quiet. There were no loud cars outside, no voices in the hallway, no television playing somewhere nearby. Just the low, ordinary nighttime sounds of a building settling, air moving faintly through the room, and the occasional noise from outside near the balcony. Then I felt it again. A touch against my side. I opened my eyes slightly, but the room was dark enough that I could not make out much. I stayed still and waited, almost trying to catch him moving. Nothing happened for a while. Then another light touch. I remember feeling annoyed and confused at the same time. I went to the farthest edge of my side of the bed, as if that would make it impossible for him to reach me without clearly moving across the mattress. I thought that would settle it. If I stayed as far away as possible, then either the touches would stop or I would know for sure that something was wrong. But I still felt them. At some point, I must have fallen asleep again, because the night became blurry after that. The next morning, I brought it up with my friend. I did not want to sound strange, so I asked carefully. I asked him whether he had been moving around a lot during the night, or whether he had been touching me by accident. His reaction surprised me. He said he thought the same thing about me. He told me that during the night he had felt what seemed like someone using a phone near him. He thought I was awake, chatting or scrolling on my phone, and that my elbow had been touching him while I was doing it. He said he had felt the touches too. For him, it seemed like I was the one moving around. He thought I had been sitting or leaning near him, using my phone with my elbow pressing lightly against his side. But that did not make sense either. I told him I had been at the far edge of the bed. I had not been using my phone. I had not been reaching across toward him, and the bed was large enough that neither of us should have been close enough to touch the other without deliberately moving. He told me that at one point he had turned his head to look at me because he wanted to ask what I was doing. He expected to see me awake looking down at my phone. Instead, he saw me sleeping at the far edge of the bed. I was nowhere near him. He said that was when he became quiet. He did not wake me up. He did not ask me about it right away. He just lay there, realizing that whatever he had been feeling could not have been me. That conversation made me feel worse than the touches had. When something strange happens to you alone, there is always a part of you that can say you were tired. You can say you were dreaming. You can say you misunderstood what your body felt while you were half asleep. But when another person describes a similar thing without knowing what you experienced, it becomes harder to dismiss. We had both blamed each other. We had both thought the other person was touching us. And both of us had been lying too far apart for that to make sense. The next night was worse. I had trouble falling asleep from the beginning. I kept thinking about what we had talked about. I kept wondering whether the first night had been some strange coincidence. Maybe we had both moved more than we remembered. Maybe the mattress transferred motion in a weird way. Maybe one of us had been dreaming and the other had been awake. But even as I tried to reason through it, I felt tense. I did not want to sleep. At some point, I finally drifted off. Then I started having dreams. Not one dream that continued through the night, but several separate dreams that seemed to come one after another. I remember waking up between them, feeling unusually alert, then slipping back into sleep and finding myself pulled into another strange scene. In one of the dreams, I was shown a map. I do not remember what country or city it was supposed to be. I do not remember whether there were names written on it or whether I recognized any roads. I only remember looking down at a map and feeling that it mattered. It was not like a normal dream where things jump around randomly. The map seemed deliberate, like I was being shown a place, like someone wanted me to remember it. I woke up from that dream with an intense sensation in my body. It was not fear exactly. It was a strange wave of pleasure or warmth, much stronger than anything that made sense for simply waking from sleep. I remember becoming aware of my hands and the pressure of my fingers against my palm. Even the touch of my own thumb against my hand felt unusually intense, almost overwhelming. That confused me. I was not doing anything. I had only just woken up. I remember lying there, feeling strange, trying to understand why my body felt so sensitive. Then I became sleepy again. It was like the tiredness pulled me down before I could think about it too much. I slipped back into sleep. The dream came back. Not exactly the same, but with the same feeling. The map. The strange sense that I was being shown something. the impression that I was not fully in control of what I was dreaming. I woke again. This time, I looked at the clock. It said 4:20. That time stuck in my mind because I was already disturbed by the dreams and the sensations. I remember looking at the numbers and feeling like I had not been asleep for very long, even though I had already gone through several dreams. I tried to settle myself. I told myself that everyone has strange dreams sometimes. Sleep can be unpredictable, especially when you are anxious or in an unfamiliar place. You can wake up at odd times, feel strange sensations in your body, and have dreams that feel more vivid than normal. That should have reassured me. It did not. I lay there waiting for sleep to come back. At some point after 4, I woke up fully. This time I was lying on my back and staring at the roof. I knew I was awake. The room was dark, but I could make out the ceiling above me. I could hear my friend breathing somewhere on the other side of the bed. The air felt still. Nothing seemed unusual. Then I felt the touches again. At first, they were small. A light brush against my arm, a pressure near my shoulder, something touching the blanket near my side. I stayed still and tried to figure out what it could be. Maybe an animal, that was my first thought. Maybe something small had gotten into the room, a cat, a bug, or something crawling across the bed. I tried to listen for movement. I tried to see if the sheets shifted, but there was nothing. The blankets over me did not move. The mattress did not dip. There was no sound of paws, claws, wings, or anything else. Then I thought maybe it was the air. Maybe a draft was coming through the balcony door or window. Maybe cold air was moving in a way that felt like a touch. But it did not feel like air. Air does not press in one spot and then disappear. Air does not feel like fingers against your arm. Air does not shift from one place to another, like something deciding where to touch. I lay there, completely awake, trying to verify what I felt. That was the most frustrating part. There was no physical way to prove it. I could feel the touch, but I could not see anything causing it. The sheets did not lift. The blanket did not move. There was no hand, no shadow, no animal, nothing. Then I felt it again. This time, it was firmer. It did not feel like a light brush anymore. It felt like a grip, like a hand around my arm or shoulder. I remember feeling the pressure clearly enough that I almost sat up immediately. The grip was not painful, but it was deliberate. It felt as though something had wrapped around the upper part of my arm and held on for a second. I tried to test it again. Maybe the air was moving. Maybe the blanket was caught in a strange position. Maybe I had rolled onto something. But no, the room was still. The sheets were still. My friend was still asleep. I was not even in deep sleep anymore. I was fully aware, staring into the dark and feeling something that should not have been there. At that point, I woke my friend up. I did not want to be alone with it anymore. He opened his eyes slowly and asked what time it was. I remember telling him I thought it was maybe around 5, because I had looked at the clock a while earlier and remembered seeing 4:20. He reached for the clock or checked his phone. It was 3:20. That made no sense to me. I had clearly remembered seeing 4:20 earlier. I had woken from the dreams, looked at the clock, and stared at the time because it felt important. But now it was 3:20, an hour earlier. I do not know whether I misread the clock. Maybe I was still half asleep and confused the numbers. Maybe I dreamed looking at the time. Maybe the clock was wrong. Maybe I remembered it incorrectly because the entire night had been fragmented and strange. But in that moment, it felt wrong. Everything about the night already felt out of order. The touches, the shared experience from the previous night, the dreams, the map, the strange body sensations, the fact that I could not tell whether I was awake or asleep at different points. Seeing a time that seemed to move backward made me feel even more unsettled. My friend did not know what to say either. We were both tired. We were both uncomfortable, but neither of us wanted to make it bigger than it already was. Eventually, we tried to go back to sleep. I kept telling myself that I would ignore the touches if they came back. I would not react. I would not keep checking. I would not make myself more afraid by imagining things. But sleep never became deep again. I kept drifting in and out. I would start to relax, then feel another pressure on my arm or shoulder. I would lie still and wait for it to stop. I would try to keep my breathing calm. I would tell myself it was nothing. Then the grip would return. It felt like a hand around my shoulder, not hard enough to injure me, not something that dragged me, just a firm hold that made me aware of exactly where it was. I kept asking myself if it could be my friend, but he was too far away. And after the conversation from the first night, neither of us could comfortably blame the other anymore. I ignored it as best as I could. I did not want to wake him up again. I did not want to keep looking at the clock. I did not want to sit in the dark and let fear take control. Then we heard something outside the balcony. At first, it was a sound that made me think someone was there. A scrape, a shift, something close enough to the balcony that it seemed to come from just beyond the door or window. Both of us became alert. For a second, I thought maybe all the strange feelings had a simple explanation. Maybe someone was outside. Maybe an animal had been moving around. Maybe the balcony was connected to some part of the building where people could pass by. But then there was a huge crash. It sounded like a car had hit the second floor. That is the closest comparison I can make. The impact was violent enough to shake the quiet of the room. It sounded heavy, metallic, and sudden, like something large had slammed into the balcony or the outside wall. My friend and I both sat up. The sound had come from outside, but not completely outside. That was the confusing part. It seemed to come from the balcony area, but at an angle that did not make sense. It was as though something had fallen into the balcony space itself, rather than onto the ground below. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The room was silent after the impact. Then we slowly went to check. What we found was the rain channel, or gutter. It had fallen. But it had not fallen in the way we expected. It was lodged diagonally inside the balcony area, not outside on the ground, not hanging normally from the edge of the building. It was somehow inside the balcony space, tilted at an angle that made the crash seem even more impossible. I remember staring at it and trying to understand how it got there. A gutter can fall in bad weather. Metal can come loose. Old fixtures can break. Wind can pull things down. Buildings have maintenance problems. There were normal reasons for a rain channel to collapse. But the position of it made no sense to us. It looked like it had come into the balcony rather than simply falling away from the building. It explained the huge noise. It did not explain the angle. And it did not explain the rest of the night. We notified the owner. I do not remember exactly what we told them. Maybe we explained that something had fallen into the balcony. Maybe we said there was damage and a loud crash during the night. We probably did not mention everything else. It is difficult enough to explain a broken gutter. It is much harder to explain that you and your friend had both felt someone touching you in a bed large enough for 3 people. After that, we tried to sleep, but neither of us slept deeply. The room felt different after the crash. The balcony was no longer just a dark space outside the window. It had become the place where something heavy had fallen with enough force to sound like a car striking the building. The bed no longer felt safe either. Every time I shifted, I wondered whether I would feel the grip again. Every time my friend moved, I wondered whether he was awake or dreaming. Every time the building made a sound, I thought about the gutter, the balcony, the dreams, the map, and the strange time on the clock. The night seemed to stretch on forever. By morning, everything looked more ordinary. Daylight does that. The balcony was visible. The rain channel was visible. The room had corners and furniture again instead of only darkness and shapes. The bed was just a bed. The ceiling was just a ceiling. But the memories did not feel ordinary. I have tried to explain the touches in practical ways. Maybe both of us were moving in our sleep more than we realized. A large mattress can transfer small movements. A blanket can slide. A person can feel a shift in the bed and interpret it as a hand or elbow. Maybe the dreams were caused by stress, unfamiliar surroundings, broken sleep, or anxiety after the first night. Dreams can feel incredibly real, especially when you wake and fall back asleep repeatedly. Your brain can blend the room around you with dream images and make ordinary sensations feel strange. Maybe I read the clock wrong. Maybe I dreamed the time. Maybe the 4:20 memory was only part of a dream that felt real because I woke up right after it. Maybe the grip on my shoulder was a muscle twitch, a blanket pulling, or pressure from the way I was lying. Maybe the sound outside and the gutter falling created a sense of danger that made everything else feel more intense. All of that is possible. But the thing that stays with me is that my friend had his own experience before I told him mine. He felt touches too. He thought I was using my phone and touching him with my elbow. Then he looked over and saw me asleep at the far edge of the bed. That is the part I cannot fully explain. We did not have the same dream. We did not tell each other what to feel. We both assumed the other person was responsible, and both of us were wrong. Maybe there was still a simple explanation. Maybe the mattress was uneven. Maybe the blanket shifted in a strange way. Maybe someone else had entered the room without us knowing. Maybe our memories have changed over time. But whatever the explanation was, that night never felt normal. It started with small touches in a bed that was too large for us to be touching. It continued with dreams that felt like messages, a map I could not understand, and a clock that seemed to show the wrong hour. Then it became firmer, like a hand gripping my arm and shoulder. And finally, something huge crashed into the balcony with enough force to make us think a car had hit the second floor. We did eventually sleep. We notified the owner. The rain channel had a physical explanation, even if the way it landed was strange. But the rest of the night stayed with me. Not because I know it was paranormal, not because I know something was in the room, but because I never found a reason that made every part of it fit. The touching, the shared confusion, the dream map, the impossible time, the grip, the crash, all of it happened in one long night that I still cannot fully explain. The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.